In a world addicted to attention where everyone is performing, posting, and reacting, there's something deeply unsettling and powerful about the man who remains calm. The man who doesn't flinch when challenged, who doesn't rush to prove, to please, or to chase. This man, often misunderstood as arrogant or distant, is in truth practicing the highest form of confidence, nonchalance. But don't mistake it for apathy. He's not numb. He feels everything. He just chooses not to reveal it. Because he understands that in the theater of power, what you don't show is often more influential than what you do. He knows that when you display neediness, whether for validation, love, or control, you hand people the tools to manipulate you. But when you show nothing, when your eyes reveal no desperation, your posture, no anxiety, your words, no eagerness, you become unpredictable. And what people can't read, they begin to fear. What they can't control, they begin to respect. Nonchalance is not laziness. It's restraint. It's control disguised as calm. The truly confident man doesn't need to dominate a room with noise. His stillness alone disturbs the insecure. While others burn themselves out trying to be seen, he's already watching, calculating, waiting. His indifference is not weakness. It is strategy. And it draws people in. Because we are wired to chase what ignores us. We crave what resists us. We obsess over what we don't understand. That's why the nonchalant man holds such a gravitational pull. He doesn't fight for attention. He becomes the silence everyone wants to fill. And when he finally speaks or acts, it carries weight because he's not performing. He's not trying. He simply is. This kind of presence doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need approval. It moves beneath the noise, powerful, composed, and unforgettable. That's not just confidence. That's command. In a society that rewards the loudest voice and the fastest reaction, restraint has become a forgotten art and a rare source of true power. Most people react instinctively. They lash out when insulted, panic when ignored, chase when rejected. But every time you react without thinking, you surrender control not just over the moment, but over yourself. The truly powerful man does the opposite. He doesn't let emotions dictate his movements. He observes. He waits. He decides when and how to respond, not because he's passive, but because he's deliberate. And that discipline, that ability to pause while others panic, creates a psychological shift. Suddenly, the one who's calm holds the advantage. The one who's silent holds the attention. Because nothing is more unnerving than someone who cannot be provoked. Reaction is easy. It's cheap. Anyone can yell back, argue, or flinch. But restraint, that's forged. It's built through internal battles that most never win, battles between pride and patience, ego and strategy. The man who can sit in discomfort, who can stand in the storm without blinking, becomes a presence others can't ignore. His stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting the chaos of those around him. It makes people uncomfortable, exposed. And in that discomfort, they reveal their weaknesses, their desperation, their lack of control. Meanwhile, the man who does not react is gathering data. He's letting others show their hand first. Because true strength is not about domination. It's about emotional sovereignty. This man does not chase closure. He does not argue to be understood. He's not pulled by every shift in the wind. He moves only when the move is worth making. That is power to act not out of impulse, but out of intention. The world may mislabel this as cold. But it's not coldness, it's clarity. Clarity that protects your energy. Clarity that disarms your enemies. And in the end, restraint doesn't weaken your presence. It intensifies it. Because the one who holds back when it's hardest to is the one who ends up in control. Mystery is magnetic. In a world where everyone overshares, overexplains, and overexposes, the man who reveals nothing becomes unforgettable. His silence isn't awkward, it's electric. His lack of urgency doesn't signal disinterest, it triggers fascination. Why? Because the unknown stirs curiosity. When people can't figure you out, when they can't label you, decode your intentions, or predict your next move, you become a puzzle they feel compelled to solve. And the harder it is to solve you, the more they obsess. This is the paradox of power. People are drawn not to what's available, but to what's elusive. The nonchalant man understands this. He doesn't play every card. He doesn't flood others with emotion or explanation. He withholds, not to manipulate, but to maintain power. His mystery creates tension, the kind of tension that lingers in the mind long after he's left the room. People replay his words, analyze his silence, wonder what he's thinking, what he's feeling, and that wondering, that's control. That's leverage. Because when people are busy guessing your intentions, they're no longer managing their own. You've entered their thoughts, disrupted their focus, bent the emotional frame in your direction. But here's the secret. The nonchalant man is not empty. He feels deeply. He thinks sharply. He's just trained himself not to hand over that depth to those who haven't earned it. He's not emotionally unavailable, he's emotionally selective. And that selection creates scarcity. Scarcity creates value. In every relationship, in every room, the man who reveals less is perceived to have more control, more power, more mystery. People don't chase clarity, they chase possibility. They fall for the gaps, the silence, the unanswered questions. That's what keeps them engaged, what keeps them addicted. The nonchalant man becomes the unresolved story, the unfinished sentence, the shadow in the background they can't stop watching. And that mystery, that's what gives him gravity. That's what gives him presence. He doesn't need to impress. He lets their imagination do the work. Impulse is the enemy of power. In a society wired for instant gratification, where every emotion becomes a post, and every opinion demands a reaction, discipline is what separates the ordinary from the untouchable. Most people are slaves to their urges. They speak before they think. They move before they observe. They burn bridges just to feel something in the moment. But the man who has trained himself, truly trained himself to pause, to breathe, to wait, that man holds real power. He's not reactive, he's responsive. And that single distinction changes everything. Discipline is the quiet engine behind nonchalance. It's what allows a man to stand in the fire of disrespect and not flinch, to feel insulted and not lash out, to feel desire and not chase. The nonchalant man is not born this way, he builds it. Every time he chooses silence over validation, patience over anger, observation over noise, he sharpens his edge. While the world reacts impulsively, he plays the long game. Because he understands that power isn't seized in a moment of emotion, it's cultivated through thousands of unseen decisions. Discipline isn't glamorous, it's not loud, it's the work done in silence, the internal battles no one claps for, the restraint that nobody sees but everyone feels. It's the reason some men walk into a room and own the space without saying a word. Because discipline creates presence. It creates pressure. It creates mystery. And people are drawn to that rare energy, an energy that says, I've already chosen who I am. Nothing you do will change that. Impulse is easy. Anyone can react. But to hold back, to carry yourself with intention, to delay gratification when everything inside you is screaming for release, that's a form of power most will never touch. Because most would rather feel something now than build something lasting. But not the nonchalant man. His calm isn't passive, it's the result of war. And he won that war by mastering himself. Emotional sovereignty is the final form of strength. It's not about being cold, it's about being rooted. The nonchalant man doesn't lack emotion. In fact, he feels it all intensely. But unlike most, he doesn't hand those emotions over to the world like loose change. He owns them, he filters them, he protects them, because he knows that in a world desperate to pull you in every direction, your ability to stay centered is what makes you powerful. He doesn't chase connection to fill a void. He doesn't beg for validation to feel real. He stands on solid emotional ground, and from that ground he chooses what and who deserves his energy. This isn't detachment, it's discipline. The nonchalant man doesn't avoid love. He simply refuses to lose himself in it. He can care without collapsing. He can show up fully without being consumed. because his identity isn't wrapped in how others treat him. It's carved from within, and that inner strength. That's what makes him so hard to shake. While others fall apart over rejection, he recalibrates. While others overextend themselves for attention, he withholds, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. He knows his worth, and that knowledge governs his behavior. Emotional sovereignty gives him options. He doesn't move from scarcity. He doesn't cling. He doesn't perform softness just to be accepted. He remains grounded in storms, composed in chaos, and whole in solitude. And because he doesn't need, he becomes the one others want. That's the paradox. The man who doesn't demand love commands it. The one who doesn't chase influence becomes influential. Because confidence born from wholeness is rare, and people feel it. The nonchalant man isn't empty. He's full but selective. That selection creates distance. That distance builds respect. He doesn't fear vulnerability. He just doesn't give it away cheaply. Because emotional power isn't about exposure, it's about control. And the man who controls his emotions rather than being controlled by them is the one who shapes his world rather than being shaped by it. In a world that never stops moving, stillness becomes dominance. Not because it's loud, but because it's rare. Most people are in constant motion, scrolling, reacting, chasing validation like a drug. Their emotions are on display. Their opinions unfiltered. Their presence frantic. But the nonchalant man is different. He doesn't scramble to be seen. He doesn't fight to be heard. He is calm, composed, measured. And that very stillness disturbs people because it exposes what they lack. His presence is unsettling not because he's doing too much, but because he's doing so little. With such command, when you are still in a room full of noise, you force others to confront their own instability. They begin to question, why isn't he reacting? Why doesn't he care? Why is he so calm when everyone else is tense? That confusion shifts the emotional power dynamic. You no longer have to assert yourself. Your very restraint becomes the assertion. Stillness creates contrast, and contrast creates power. Because when everything is loud, what's quiet becomes impossible to ignore. This doesn't mean the nonchalant man is indifferent. On the contrary, he sees more senses, more understands more. But he chooses when to reveal it. He doesn't interrupt chaos. He waits for it to exhaust itself. And when the moment arrives, he moves calmly, decisively unshaken. That kind of timing comes from internal mastery, from years of not reacting, from learning that power isn't in proving, it's in positioning. Others may misread his silence as weakness, but he doesn't flinch at being misunderstood, because he knows what most don't. Those who shout the most usually have the least control. Stillness, on the other hand, radiates quiet strength. It commands the room without begging for attention. It doesn't rise to every challenge, it makes others rise to it. And in a chaotic world, the man who refuses to be moved becomes the one who moves everything. Perception is power. It doesn't matter who you are deep down. What matters is who the world believes you are. The nonchalant man understands this. He doesn't just control his actions, he controls how his actions are interpreted. He shapes the narrative without ever explaining himself. While others are busy trying to prove their worth, he allows perception to do the heavy lifting. He knows that if you appear composed, you'll be treated with respect. If you appear unaffected, people will hesitate to test you. In the world of power, the appearance of strength is often more useful than strength itself. This isn't deception, it's precision. Machiavelli himself taught that it's not enough to be virtuous, you must seem virtuous. Likewise, it's not enough to feel confident, you must look it, move like it, speak like it. And the man who can project calm, who can sit in the fire without flinching, becomes the psychological alpha, whether he says a word or not. Because most people don't know how to handle stillness. They expect reaction. They expect performance. When you give them none of it, their mind fills in the blanks, and those blanks become your advantage. By mastering his own expression, the nonchalant man controls how others behave around him. His silence makes people reflect. His calm makes people question themselves. He offers no clues, tells no emotional openings. And that mystery becomes leverage. It builds tension. It makes people self-correct, hesitate, even admire, not because they were forced to, but because his presence demanded it. He never begs to be understood. He never chases clarity, because he knows the moment you try to explain your power, you lose it. He doesn't need others to see everything just enough to keep them guessing. And in that guessing, he becomes the one they orbit. Not because he fought for control, but because he embodied it. Quietly, intentionally, relentlessly. In a world drowning in noise, the man who speaks less becomes the one everyone listens to. Not because his voice is louder, but because it's rarer. The nonchalant man understands the economy of words. He knows that when you say too much, you dilute your message. You expose your thoughts before they've had time to mature. But when you speak sparingly, every word carries gravity. Every sentence becomes a moment of clarity in a world full of chaos. People lean in not because you demand their attention, but because you don't give it freely. This restraint isn't just about communication, it's about presence. The man who doesn't speak unless necessary sends a powerful message: I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to observe, to decide, to influence. His silence isn't emptiness, it's strategy. And because he speaks with purpose, when he finally does speak, people listen. They listen because his words are unexpected. They listen because they've been wondering what he's thinking. They listen because he's not trying to be heard, he's letting them choose to hear him. The truth is, most people speak to fill space. They ramble out of insecurity, confess out of weakness, and overshare out of a need to be validated. But the nonchalant man speaks only when his words offer more value than his silence. He isn't afraid of the tension that comes from quiet. He welcomes it. He knows silence reveals more than noise ever could. In silence, people expose themselves. In silence, power accumulates. His measured presence commands respect. People begin to study his words, replay his statements, and search for meaning in even his smallest remarks, because what's rare becomes sacred. And that scarcity, that discipline in voice and expression, makes his communication feel intentional, authoritative, and memorable. So he speaks less, not because he has nothing to say, but because most things simply aren't worth saying. And that decision over time makes his voice impossible to ignore. Being misunderstood is the price of being unshakable. The nonchalant man is often labeled cold, arrogant, or distant, not because he is any of those things, but because people can't comprehend what they can't control. Most are addicted to being liked, to being seen as good, agreeable, relatable. But the man who chooses stillness over reaction, silence over explanation, and composure over confrontation doesn't play by those rules. He understands a deeper truth: you don't owe anyone your clarity, your emotions, or your justifications. In fact, power often requires you to be the question mark in the room, to let people assume, project, and misjudge while you remain centered. Because the more they try to figure you out, the more they reveal about themselves. Their discomfort becomes your mirror. Their need for your validation becomes your advantage. And while they scramble to define you, you stay still anchored in who you are, unmoved by their opinions, untouched by their urgency. This kind of stillness isn't natural, it's built. It's trained through moments of restraint, through holding your tongue when your pride screams, through walking away when your ego wants to stay and prove a point. But each time you choose dignity over reaction, you solidify your dominance. Not by force, but by control. Not by shouting back, but by refusing to engage in noise. The nonchalant man doesn't fear misunderstanding because he's not trying to be understood, he's trying to be effective. And effectiveness often looks mysterious. It looks detached. But that's because most people equate emotion with connection, noise with relevance. The nonchalant man breaks that illusion. He becomes memorable not by explaining himself, but by being the one who needs no explanation. And in a world obsessed with being seen and heard, the man who holds his silence, who lets others talk, who never flinches when misjudged, that man becomes unforgettable. Because power, real power, doesn't demand to be understood. It simply refuses to be moved. Nonchalance is not a personality trait, it is a discipline earned through inner warfare. Most people think being calm under pressure is just a matter of temperament, but the truth is, the nonchalant man wasn't born with composure. He built it. Through heartbreak, through betrayal, through silence so loud it nearly broke him. He didn't escape emotion. He conquered it. Every time he wanted to react and chose stillness instead, every time he felt insulted but held his expression, he carved away weakness and replaced it with control. This kind of calm doesn't happen overnight. It's forged through discomfort, through the tension of feeling deeply but refusing to flinch. The nonchalant man has trained himself to move slowly in a fast world, to pause when others panic, to listen when others defend. His presence is deliberate, not accidental. His restraint is precise, not passive. And because he no longer performs, he becomes impossible to ignore. While others sell their emotions cheap, posting every thought, reacting to every insult, he protects his energy like it's gold. And that energy, conserved and intentional, becomes influence. This is what separates him. His quiet doesn't mean emptiness, it means preparation. His stillness isn't avoidance, it's strategy. Because he understands that urgency is often the enemy of power. The man who must act, who must react, who must explain, always loses leverage. But the man who waits, who observes, who strikes only when the moment is right, that man bends the outcome in his favor before he even moves. Nonchalance is the mark of someone who has mastered the hardest thing in life himself. Not through suppression, but through transformation. It is not the absence of emotion, but the elevation of it. Not the denial of chaos, but the choice not to mirror it. The nonchalant man doesn't pretend not to care, he simply cares on his own terms. And in that discipline lies his power. It's not loud, it's not showy, but it's unmistakable. Because once you've earned this kind of calm, the world can no longer use itself to move you. In a culture obsessed with speed validation and instant reactions, the true mark of strength is restraint. The core message of this philosophy is simple yet radical. You don't need to prove yourself to be powerful, you need to master yourself. The most powerful individuals are not those who shout the loudest, react the fastest, or seek attention constantly. They are the ones who remain unmoved by noise, unshaken by chaos, and selective about where their energy goes. This isn't about pretending not to care. It's about learning what's truly worth caring about. In everyday life, this principle shows up in how we handle conflict, rejection, pressure, and even success. When someone disrespects you, your impulse might be to react. But silence, calculated. Composed silence can be louder than any outburst. When the world pulls at your emotions, the man who pauses, who waits, who observes before he acts, that's the man who stays in control. Emotional sovereignty is your shield, and nonchalance is the strategy that guards it. This mindset also redefines confidence. You don't need to beg for respect, you earn it by showing you don't need approval. You don't chase influence, you embody it. You move slowly, speak deliberately, and act with purpose. In doing so, you train others to treat you with a different kind of reverence, not because you demanded it, but because your energy commands it. The takeaway is clear: master yourself first. Build the discipline to remain calm under pressure. Stop over-explaining, stop chasing, stop reacting to everything. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. In fact, real power is quiet, focused, and deeply intentional. When you carry that energy, the world shifts around you, not because you forced it, but because you became impossible to ignore.